It's been over 100 episodes now, so I've had to upgrade over the couple years, dude. It's
Yeah.
nice though. I like the fact that I have it all set up and stuff, so I don't have to worry about doing that shit now. I'm just like, all right, well, we'll just stay here for a couple years until I move again.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say it's smooth.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So how's your weekend, Lance? I know you had somebody compete.
Yeah, yeah. St. Louis. I learned there's nothing to see in St. Louis. So if anyone's from St.
Yeah.
Louis area, I do apologize. That place is a shithole.
Yeah.
Uh, um, but no, man, the venue is super cool. If anyone listening is thinking about doing a show around this relative time, the Union Station in St. Louis really is cool, bro. You pull up, it looks like an actual castle. The staff at that hotel have got to be the best staff I've ever been working with in any form of like travel, like accommodation. They were so kind, they were so friendly. It was super cool. Friday was a bit of a shit show. I think I ended the day, even with a 5 hour car ride, I think I still ended up close to 30,000 steps.
Oh
Um,
shit.
Wow.
so, long story short, on the way there, I didn't realize St. Louis had like recreational usage of THC. So, obviously, I'm going to make
Yeah.
that a stop on the way there. So I loaded up on dabs, right? And I got as much as I could draw out of my debit card, right? So I drew X amount of money out, right? Yeah. So I was just loading up and I was loving it because, Chicago's so expensive. So it's like either Michigan or St. Louis. If you buy in Chicago, get ready for like $100 worth of weed to turn into 400 bucks.
Jesus.
Um, it's crazy, bro. Chicago sucks. So I load up and I'm pumped. I'm in a great mood. The weather's nice. We get there, and then all of a sudden, I go to swipe my debit card for a transaction, and it gets denied like twice. And I'm like, well, first off, there's more than plenty cash in there. What's going on? So I call BMO, and they're like, oh, yeah, you hit your daily spending limit. And I was like, excuse me? And they were like, yeah, like your daily spending limit's like $1,000. And I was like, I've been with you guys for 4 years, and I've definitely spent more than $1,000 in a day because I bought like a $2,000 couch last year. So I was like, I know for a fact I don't have a spending limit. And then they couldn't do anything for me, and I don't have any other form of like money on me, and I still had to get the tickets. I was trying to get a coaching pass. I go talk to the people at the venue, and they're like, sorry man, all we do is cash. And I'm like, bro, no one takes Zelle, no one takes Venmo, no one takes anything. So it was that, and then my client didn't have his scale from home. Like he just left work and hit the
Ooh.
road, so he didn't have a scale, didn't have his rice, didn't have a bunch of shit. And like this is my first swing at the bat in like 3 years, bro. So like you know how it is, man. Like imposter syndrome's riding high. I'm nervous as fuck. I want to make sure that everything goes perfect. So I'm just freaking out, running around town, walking around St. Louis. It's ghetto as shit everywhere you go. Like, you're just nervous going around. But Saturday was super smooth as a turnaround. He woke up. So on Friday, we found a look around 195.8 because luckily the hotel had a scale, but it was one of those old school ones where you're sliding the little thing. So I was like, okay, at least we've got a scale. We found a great look where you look dry, you look crisp, you got a little bit of fullness because he wasn't as conditioned as we would have liked him to be because I just started working with him 5 weeks ago. So just made the best of it, right? Um, and then we pushed food a little bit more Friday night just because I knew he was dropping about 4.5, 5 pounds per night on average, around 6 liters of water. And then in the morning, he woke up 194, and I was like, perfect, dude. That means we don't have to give you much food. Prejudging's probably going to get you around like 11 o'clock. And we walked him up there, dude, and it was so funny. So I was sitting there, and I was talking with my lady, and all of a sudden, they go 35 Masters Division walks out, and dude, it's big black guy, big black guy, big
Yeah.
black guy. And I look at Serena, and I was like, this is a 35 plus division. I was like, these dudes are huge. But no, man. I mean, the guy who won, rightfully so, won. He had a really great anterior shot. His posing was a little weird from the back, but he beat Brendan in chest fullness. He beat him in conditioning from the front. So the right man did win that show. Like I had no quorum with it, and truthfully, I was like, okay, so that guy beat him in 35 plus. And then the men's physique class overall had about 11 to 12 guys. And they had him in that 1-2 spot right next to him the whole way through, and then they swapped him out to the 3 and 4. And I was getting a little nervous, like, damn, is he gonna get third or fourth? But he got second overall on a really good show, man. And I was just really happy. You know, a lot of things went wrong Friday, and you know, I had a great call with Lacey Friday night, and I had a great chat with my coach Alex. And Alex is just such a genius in just the way he thinks, and he's so calm, cool, and collected. And he was like, you know, bro, first off, this isn't going to be the last time this happens. He's like, I've got horror stories for you with
Yeah.
clients and shows. And he's like, you know, people are going to run out of food. People are going to forget
Oh
their
yeah.
tripods, their ring lights, their backdrops. And
Always.
he's like, you know what it is? He's like, you did the right thing, because I was just, you know, sitting there and I was like, just stay calm, cool, and collected. Don't stress him out. Don't let him know anything's wrong. I just kept being like, bro, we're going to be good. We're going to be fine. We'll figure it out. And we just worked with what we had, and we brought a really good look to the stage. And him and I had a great conversation Saturday. And, you know, he was like, you know, man, like, there's no way I would have been able to bring this look. This is the best look I've ever had to date, because he's always done it on his own. And this is like his fourth or fifth show. So I was just really happy, man. Obviously you want to win, but it's bodybuilding and it's a competition, and only one person can go home with the trophy. But
Yep.
you know, we brought a really good look. We brought a really dry and lean look, and that's all you can do is just put him in the best position to win at the end of the day. And shout out to Colton. I was kind of freaking out a little bit Friday, and I called Colton, and I was just, you know, I was overwhelmed, truthfully. I was like stressed out, sweating, running around, pissed off, nothing's going well. Me and the girl are going back and forth, and we're just like not actually mad at each other. We're just pissed off with what's going on. And Colton was like, bro, you know what to do. Just, you know, find a look, get him on the scale, keep track of everything, and try to replicate that the next day. So thank you again, Colton, for taking that
Yeah.
call midday.
Yeah, and I mean shit like that's gonna happen, just like you were
Yeah.
just saying. My this past November I had a men's physique guy competing, and so he's local to my area, so I was driving to the show with him. It was in Iowa, and he forgot his food scale. He forgot like three different things that we needed for his meal plan, and I could tell he started freaking out. We're sitting in the car, and I could tell like his face. I'm like, dude, it's cool. Like, we're gonna stop at a Walmart here. Let's put it in the map. We'll stop at this Walmart before we get to the hotel. In my head, I'm like, are you fucking serious? But then
Yeah.
you know, you can't show that. You can't, because they're
Yeah.
going to start working themselves up. And, you know, we all know that cortisol is the killer of a good peak. So,
Yeah.
you know, you just can't feed into it. And you did the right thing. Just keep it calm. Just being like, hey, let's go buy a scale. It's going to be all good. You know, here, I've got some extra rice. Here you go. You know, that's what you do. And, you know what? I guarantee he's not going to make that mistake again next
No,
time.
no.
He's gonna
You,
be
you
like,
only make it once.
Yeah, no, I'd jack
Yeah.
his ass if it ever happened again. But no, it was a successful weekend, man. It was a great one to get under the belt right away too, because I'm really trying to work on this thing in life where like I try to take every negative that could happen and just be like, you know, it's always a learning lesson, right? Like no matter the situation, if you sit and you ponder on it, you're just gonna make it worse. And I went to bed and I pulled out my iPhone for my notes, and even though Lacey's got a full template for like a checklist of what to have, I just doubled down on everything, you know, just to make sure. You know, I texted my client Beamer, who's this weekend. I texted Bailey, who's up next weekend. You know, I was just like, hey, I know I've already sent you guys all this stuff, but I just kind of want to double down on some like non-negotiables to have packed and have ready, and just some things to think about. So it sounds stupid, but I'm almost glad everything that went wrong, because it was such a good smelling salt to the dome of like what to be prepared for on a coaching weekend, especially when you're not in your home city and you're traveling and you might not have those resources readily available to you.
yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think an important thing there is that you mentioned that, you know, you are doubling down on it. And I think a lot of people need to actually go through those things. And it's not even like anything horrible necessarily happens. So it's like
Yeah.
you learn that lesson like the best way you possibly could, in terms of like, okay, well, nothing horribly went wrong. Nobody said anything bad about you. Nobody left on bad terms. Everything went well on the show day. But you still learn that lesson at the end of the day. So just make sure that all the rest of your athletes the rest of the year are just going to get better from this one experience. So that's just a positive at the end of the day.
100%, bro. 100%.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, so the topic I kind of wanted to start with today, just going off the top is Lance put it on his story the other day and was like, "Hey, we need to talk about this on the podcast." I'm like,
Yeah.
we've touched on growth hormone and insulin individually multiple times now at this point, but for whatever reason, it seems like there's still just like this stigma going around about like insulin or growth hormone and what it's going to do to your physique from a negative standpoint. And honestly, I'm just going to call it what it is. I think, quite honestly, too, we have a lot of popular athletes in the space just quite literally lying about like what doses they're taking of these things, saying, "Oh no, I never go above 5 or 6 units of growth hormone. I don't use insulin." And then you hear in circles, you hear from other people a very different story about
Yeah.
what they're actually doing behind the scenes. And it's not mean like calling people out or saying, we're not being like Redditors here being like, oh, they're lying about like what they're taking, blah blah blah. But they are. And this is not something that I want to people get twisted. These are still very good athletes. Like, they're where they are because they are who they are, whether it be genetically and the hard work that they put in. But regardless, because of this, now there's like this idea that something negative happens to your physique once you go past like 5 or 6 units of growth hormone, or something negative happens to your physique once you start utilizing exogenous insulin. And I just kind of want to talk about it today and just kind of talk about our experiences with it as coaches. People have probably heard Tom talk a lot about how he likes to utilize it. People have probably heard me and Lance speak about it at different times about how we like to utilize it. But I think just kind of going through a refresh on that before we get into some other topics, I think is as good as time as any, especially when we have top level bikini coaches coming into the space saying that insulin is gonna, you're gonna take a little bit of fast acting insulin and you're gonna get insulin resistant and die or something.
Yeah. I guess I could start. My opinion with that is absolutely 100% in line with what you said. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the morphology changes that you can actually accrue from growth hormone, insulin use, especially abuse in like high doses. But I think a lot of that is also not necessarily taking into account a lot of the other factors that could be going on as well. Like, people talk about palumboism, which is like just GH gut basically. And it's like, okay, well, you aren't also accounting for the fact that the person was, maybe having gut issues for like the better part of like 6 years that they were bodybuilding. They may have never had, opportunities in the off season actually pull back on food, and they just kept pushing and pushing past a certain point. And you also aren't taking into account the fact that they may have started out bodybuilding at 180 pounds, and this guy is now 330 pounds. And, your waist is essentially going to grow just from the fact that you are structurally a bigger human being. So I think there's a lot of things. And, the whole discussion around insulin causing midsection growth didn't necessarily come around until very recently in bodybuilding years. Because if we look at guys in the 90s, people who everybody really praises for their midsection, Milos was helping a lot of those guys. And a lot of those guys, Flex Wheeler, Nasser El Somebody, Milos himself,
Yep.
all had really great midsection. So to kind of isolate that as a variable also doesn't necessarily make sense when we look back historically at how that drug was used. But I won't take up too much of the floor, Lance. I'm kind of curious about your opinion.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it right on the head. And the biggest thing that I always tell people is we've never seen gut health become such a focus in the health industry, I feel like, as it has been in the past 12 to 24 months. I feel like, with, all these new educational courses, like even in Kuza stuff, like when I open up some of that educational shit, I gotta Google half the words on some of the slides because the actual in-depth knowledge on it is just so extensive. And the reality is, I just don't think people have had that resource for a very, very long time in the educational space, especially in this sport. Just for example, I've got one of my clients who's just finishing up one of his blasts, and when we got together, his food was sitting around like 6,000, and he wasn't really like growing past like a certain point. And when I started with him, I was like, what's like your biggest concern right now? And he was like, honest to God, man, I'm just worried about like the growth hormone. And mind you, he was only on 6 units before bed, which is like nothing, as we all know. Um, And he's like, my gut just feels distended. I'm not having consistent bowel movements. So right out the gates, I was like, well, let's just pull food down a little bit. Let's pull your protein back. He was sitting around like that 1.7 gram per pound range with his last coach. Carbs were at like 700 plus. Fats were in like the 80s or 90s. And I just brought everything down by like a chunk. And he dropped weight like super aggressively. But I only pulled his calories down like 500 calories in the first 3 weeks, and then I did another 500 calorie pull, and sure enough, he got from like 215 to 206, and then he had no vegetables or fruit in his program, mind you, and he was working with a coach that has a very large roster, and he does pretty well in the bodybuilding space, and he's a great bodybuilder himself, but I was like, dude, you're probably not absorbing anything. Like, you have no micronutrients. Like
Yeah.
I even learned that from Sean, just utilizing like sauerkraut, kimchi, probiotics, and things like that. Like me and Colton talked about it. I was dealing with some gut health issues a couple months back where, dude, everything was moving through me. And Alex was like, bro, are you eating your veggies? And I was like, I'm so sorry. I've been a horrible client. I have not been
Yeah.
eating my vegetables. And now I won't miss meals without them, just transparently with how much better I feel and how tighter I've been and how my performance and sleep and everything. So, I think that's really something that people need to put a real focus on is like their digestive health. Like we talk about it all the time. You have no problem spending $1,000 on peptides your next cycle, but when it comes to buying $49.99 Revive GI support, you're all up in arms about how expensive it is, and it's just something I think athletes need to take a lot more seriously.
100%.
Yeah. So
I
think,
was going to interrupt, but
yeah,
we have some.
I think like the GI health is a huge aspect of this. And then again, what Tom said about how much food people are eating in the off season is going to be a large contributor to, if you're distended all the time, eventually that cavity of the body is going to follow that morphology that you're constantly putting it under that pressure of all the food in the GI. So I think that's a big thing too. One thing I've seen really work for this too, and a lot of my clients that are pushing insulin and pushing growth hormone are usually also people whose food is getting quite high in the off season, especially for bringing in a decent amount of insulin. There probably has to be a decent amount of food and carbohydrate that's, making that an appropriate decision. A big thing that I've really taken to is like, honestly, once I start getting people past like that 400 grams of rice per meal kind of area, stuff like that, I will not be afraid to take a couple of their meals and literally cut that rice amount almost in half and bring in like dried fruit, like dates, dried cranberries, things that are going to take up a lot less GI space. This is also a really good strategy. We won't go down that rabbit hole too much because we'll stay on topic, but also a really good strategy with peaking too when you're trying to manage midsection control. So I think that, GI health and the food volume is just a huge contributor here. But going back to the whole conversation about the midsection insulin in general, I think the reason why people really think this could be a thing is because we see like in insulin resistant population, a lot of visceral fat storage around the organs, things like that. So people associate insulin with like visceral fat storage, but they're not making the connection that when we're talking about that, we're mostly talking about that in populations that are already insulin resistant. And this is something I'm huge on when we're applying insulin with my bodybuilders. So it used to be very fashion that people would not bring insulin in a push until like they already started to see signs of potential insulin resistance. Dude, honestly, like a lot of my clients now, if we're going to have growth hormone at 6, 8, 10 units and we're starting a push and food's already getting past like, these are just arbitrary numbers, but like past 4,500 to 5,000 calories, carbs are pushing, into the 600s. There's a very good chance that I'm going to bring in insulin while they're already still very insulin sensitive in order to leverage, that GLUT4 translocation, some of those other things alongside the growth hormone usage and the anabolics and those synergies. I'm not going to just wait until our blood glucoses are starting to be even, really bad 2 hours after meals, things like that, to then throw insulin at it. That's where I think people get into trouble is when they're applying insulin to a situation where things have already got out of hand, then I could agree that potentially that insulin is going to contribute to further fat storage, etc. The other thing too, going back to like someone like Palumbo, people kind of associate with this argument. I'm just gonna say it for what it is. Palumbo did not use insulin like really correctly at all.
No.
He would literally purposely eat more fats with his insulin because in his mind he thought insulin would store the carbs as fat, and
Yeah.
the way he applied it was completely backwards. So if there is any amount of a chance that insulin usage does contribute to like visceral adiposity, he did it the exact way that would make that happen if that was a thing. I'm still not completely sold that it works that simply, especially if you're like a lean athlete and all those things. But that being said, if there was a way, he did it the way to make that happen. So
Yeah.
that's what I'll say about it.
You know, it's funny. You brought up the point I was exactly going to make on this topic is that insulin as a drug inherently isn't necessarily dangerous, but people can definitely misuse it, and that's what makes it dangerous, just like any other drug on the planet. The only issue is that for things like Humalog, you know, the danger is a little bit more acute than something like, you know, taking testosterone, because you load up your CC with like, you know, 5 cc's of test, you're not going to feel anything that day. But if you do that with Humalog, yeah, you're gonna feel pretty fucking hypo in about 5 seconds because you just fucking loaded up 5 cc's of Humalog into a fucking syringe, right? But I think the main issue is a lot of people, the danger as well with insulin is applying it in a situation where people are already insulin resistant, already inflamed, and they're just, you know, and that's kind of the way that we've seen insulin kind of being applied in certain scenarios, is where they wait until the very tail end of like an off season for like the last like couple weeks, but that person's already been insulin resistant for weeks now, and they use fasting blood glucose as like a measurement back in the day before we kind of knew better in terms of determining insulin resistance. Is that that's probably going to be one of the last markers that skew in a situation where there is insulin resistance. So if we're actually going to look at blood work, which we should be doing, you know, frequently throughout the year, we're going to be looking at HOMA IR, we're going to be looking at fasting insulin, we're going to be looking at triglyceride to HDL ratio, and those things are going to be better determining factors than your fasting blood glucose alone. And just kind of deploying insulin based on food need, I think, is also a discussion that a lot of people don't actually bring. And I'm glad that you kind of brought that in, because it's like, okay, well, we can wait until this person gets up to 700 grams of carbs and he isn't handling it, and then we put in the insulin. But that also seems like wasted weeks on a push when we know we only have so many weeks as an enhanced athlete on drugs where we can actually facilitate progress. We are probably not going to want to waste too many of those weeks in a situation where we're insulin resistant, just accruing more fat, waiting for the insulin to actually do its job to bring us back into a metabolic position to continue pushing. So I'm not a big fan of that approach of waiting to last minute. I think prophylactic insulin use could be beneficial for a lot of people in a lot of situations, so long as the food kind of facilitates the need. I will say there are definitely situations where I wouldn't necessarily apply insulin, especially if we're talking about a person who isn't 100% on their diet. I'm not going to put insulin in that person's plan, because if that person goes off, they, you know, swap out their last meal with like Chipotle and it has like 35 grams more fat. And I'm on kind of the same boat as you, Colton, in terms of not being convinced that it's as simple as, okay, if you eat fat and you take insulin, that just means that the fat is going to get stored directly as fat because you're taking insulin. But I do think that if you are playing with fire, you're eventually going to get in a position where you're going to get burnt. So I tend to try to kind of avoid situations where we're eating high fat foods, especially high inflammatory fat foods, of like going out to eat and, you know, using insulin with like a cheat meal and stuff like that. Those would be situations I kind of avoid applying it. But for the most part, it could be a really, really good tool. If we want to even talk about the female side of things and kind of bring that into a conversation, because I believe that's where this discussion kind of originated. I know Boston Outlaw had some things to say about insulin as well, but the main discussion was the producer guy on Beyond the Stage TV, I believe it was, who kind of made that point. So I'm kind of curious about y'all's opinion on insulin use in females.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's just another tool in the toolbox, right? Especially if you're working with a first time female that maybe is kind of on the fence still about using androgens, and she's not comfortable, taking the risk of virilization, with pushing certain drugs. But she's openly telling you, hey, I know I want to compete down the road, but I'm just maybe not as comfortable as I'd like to be to do that. I personally have had phenomenal results with females using something as basic as Novolin R pre and post workout, just on days where the food is a little bit higher. Like, for example, if I have a client that needs to bring up her glutes, right, and we're pushing that food a little bit more that day, using a small, just say like 5 units pre, 5 units post. I've gotten feedback from females that have done that, and they're like, dude, I've had the best pumps of my life utilizing that as a tool. And it's not something I'm using every single day. It's something that I'm just using, on days where we might be pushing carbohydrates a little bit higher to bring up those weaker points. So that's my experience with it in females, and I've always had phenomenal feedback from them with that.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes to the conversation, especially when we're talking about females who aren't transitioning into exogenous androgen use, that every little percentage point we can kind of get matters at that point, right? So you might go with like an enhanced open bodybuilder who's running, 1.5 grams to 2 grams of gear, a lot of growth hormone. You go, insulin's not really as big of a needle mover as those other things. Maybe potentially that is true, and I would say in my experience that's probably true. It doesn't mean I don't use insulin with those people, doesn't mean that at all, but I'm just saying, like, if we're talking about what do I see make the biggest difference in people's physiques, higher growth hormone usage and escalating in anabolic usage with the need for it, definitely is making a bigger difference than when we're adding, say, insulin in. But for a female who's not utilizing, androgens, those little percentage points add up. Like, even utilizing things like, a couple units of growth hormone, some fast acting insulin, or even eventually, like, if she's a very high food requirement female transitioning to similarly using, potentially basal and fast acting insulin, those are percentage points we could be getting with progress within the physique that otherwise, if we're just not using it because we're scared of it, then it just takes another tool off the table, and one of the few tools we have that aren't going to risk the biggest thing for females, which is virilization. Because we know most females outside of maybe like bodybuilding females aren't really touching amounts of androgens that we're as concerned. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't still be to a degree, but as concerned about like the cardiovascular impact and those other things. The biggest thing for them is virilization. So what tools can we use that don't virilize? Growth hormone and insulin are two great ones,
100%. I 100% agree. I think especially in some of those divisions where we are protecting femininity a lot more, bikini wellness specifically, we definitely do not want to be hammering the androgen button unnecessarily if we haven't exhausted all of our other tools as well. So if we're not utilizing growth hormone, if we're not utilizing, insulin in maybe an off-season scenario, maybe some peptides like, retatrutide on like a deficit or something like that, just to eke out as much progress as we can out of the non-androgenic tools, there's absolutely, no reason why bikini competitors should be on 30 milligrams of Anavar a day, but you see it. And these same coaches are the same people who are like, you shouldn't use insulin, which makes absolutely zero sense to me whatsoever, that we're talking about, using actual androgens, which are going to be the strongest drivers for hypertrophy. And then we're arguing that a drug, which you just argue, Colton, which isn't necessarily as big of a needle mover in terms of packing on as much overall mass, or as women put it, like bulkiness, how that drug is essentially going to turn you into more of an unfavorable kind of muscular looking ugly physique, as he may have put it, versus something like using low dose insulin with like low dose androgens. That would just make kind of like the most sense in my opinion. And I don't really use Lantus a lot with women because I don't believe like the daily food total kind of gets to that point for a lot of women where we're getting up to like 500 to 600 grams of carbs. However, I am a big fan of using, Humalog, Novolin R, different types of like rapid acting insulin around specific scenarios, around specific meals. And I love the approach you kind of used as well, Lance, for kind of bringing up specific body parts as well. That's a great application as well for using insulin. So I think there's a lot of use cases. Even if, this is a completely side tangent, but powerlifters actually, or strongman competitors, even use insulin for learning. If you look at chess, professional chess players, people go to bodybuilding coaches. It's funny for nootropic advice, but you guys should be going to chess players for nootropic advice because those guys take more drugs than anybody on the planet when it comes to actually improving their cognition and their reaction skills and their thought processing, creativity, and all those things are big components of playing chess. But they use intranasal insulin because it actually helps you learn, because there's a lot of things around glucose utilization in the brain. If you have a big carb meal and you have a big flood of glucose and your brain's not able to uptake that glucose, that's where you start to feel a lot of brain fog. So insulin can actually be an interesting tool of applying maybe in a pre-workout scenario for facilitating better movement pattern, ingraining better movement patterns within athletes as well, who kind of need to learn their movements a little bit better as well. So that's kind of like a side application. It's not the primary reason of why I may use insulin, but that's also a fun kind of side way of kind of using it as well. So I think it's a great drug. There's a lot of definitely a lot of great use cases. Now, when it comes to insulin in a deficit, are you guys kind of fans of using it in that situation, or do you kind of steer clear?
I've never tried it.
Yeah, I would say most cases I end up pulling insulin out, during the deficit. I wouldn't say, it depends on the individual. Like, say for example, a good example of this is Kyle, who just did Detroit. I mean, his food was so high, like even in prep, I would pull him down for a few days, and then inevitably I'd be refeeding him on like 600-700 grams of carbs like 2 or 3 days later after he drops like 4 or 5 pounds. So the first stretch of prep, like maybe about 6-7 weeks into prep, we still had some fast acting insulin around a couple of his like weaker body part days, like arms and his leg days, because those were typically where I was deploying some high days as well. But once we kind of get into that stage of prep where we're really digging, and we're really trying to get fully stripped out, I definitely will usually pull it out. And for probably most people, it's going to get pulled out a lot earlier. Kyle's kind of an exception because he handles food so well, and his food does get so high. And going back to what you said about the female too, it's definitely a rare case that we get to the carb amounts where a female is needing a basal insulin. I thought it was interesting though, because Lance, you said Bailey's food got like insanely high in her off season.
Yeah, she dude, I think she was at like 4,800, 4,900 at one point, and like we had,
insane.
I
That's
mean,
like
like
almost
Pretty
unreal.
wild, yeah.
dude, and like me and Colton talked about it the first episode. The reason I could do that is because she just trains her ass off. I mean, like she only jumped from the day we started.
Did you keep insulin in at the start of prep with her on those weak body part days, or did you pull it instantly?
No, we pulled it when we did the pre-prep phase, just because I did give her an initial good pull of food, just because I thought, well, I think we were coming in, because we started prep around like January 1st. And I told her, I was like, hey, for Thanksgiving, have a big meal and enjoy your time with your family. For Christmas, I want you to do the exact same thing. I don't want you to like have to have that like lock-in mentality till January 1st, because I knew we had so much time to work with, and we also did give her a good carb pull right out the gate. So I knew that she's similar to Kyle in the sense that like she drops weight super, super quick, or at least drops body fat really fast from an initial carb pull. So I knew we were in a good spot when we did that. And I knew she was going to have some good, like, refeed days on those holidays. And I knew we'd be just fine for that. But
Yeah.
through a large portion of that growth phase, we were utilizing the fast acting insulin on weak body part days. And then we did get to a point where we were using it 4 days a week on her training days as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say more often than not, I'm pulling insulin pretty early on in the dieting process, if not right away. What about you, Tom?
Yeah, for the most part, I do. I had one of the first athletes I ever prepped like 4 years ago. He was a diabetic, so that was actually a very interesting situation because he was type 2 diabetic, but throughout the prep, we could actually see him needing less and less insulin to the point where on peak week, he didn't need any insulin for his carb up whatsoever, which was actually really cool. So we kind of prep reversed his type 2 diabetes, which is pretty fucking awesome. So anyone that says
Crazy.
bodybuilding's unhealthy, fuck you. But for real, in all honesty, I usually don't apply it really anybody in prep. I haven't really. This is the first year I've actually had an athlete that had a really need for a high amount of food. It's my men's physique guy right now, but it's still not at the point where I'm like considering using insulin because he's so insulin sensitive already, and we already have like other tools in the toolbox as well. The mitochondrial peptides, retatrutide, which is massively going to influence insulin sensitivity as well. So all of those things are different tools in the toolbox that we can utilize without risking hypoglycemia as frequently or as intensely as we may with Humalog or something like that.
Yeah, and I think really the only reason why I left it in initially in Kyle's prep is just like we were getting the response physically we wanted out the gate, and it was actually a case of he had it in, we had it pre-workout because like initially when we started it was like he was transitioning from a different coach and it was still in place, and he actually kind of just like forgot to like be like, hey, should I still be taking insulin pre-workout? And he was for like the first 3 weeks we were working together, and he's like, hey, should I keep doing this? And I was like, well, you're looking better every single week and we're getting the response we want right now, so we'll leave it for now. I think we left it for like another 2 maybe 3 weeks after that point, and then I was finally like, hey, like food's getting low enough now, like we don't need this. Our refeed days are coming down a little bit. They're not quite 6, 7, 800 grams of carbs anymore. They're coming down to maybe more 6 and below. Let's pull that out at this point. But yeah, I would say most of the time I don't see a need for it in prep, especially like as Tom said, we have MOTS-C, which has been shown to be extremely potent for insulin sensitivity. We have retatrutide, which obviously is as well. There's just not a reason why we need that extra ability to shuttle glucose when we're already in a very insulin sensitive state dieting.
100%.
I was gonna say, yeah. On top of that, I was just trying to think. So I've got an open guy. Yeah, his name's Mitch Elby. He's like 6'4".
I
He's a
love
huge
Mitch.
dude.
Me and
Yeah,
Mitch
he's
have
the
been
man,
friends for
dude.
a long time.
Dude, Mitch is the man. But
We've
Mitch
known
is
each
one of
other
those-
since we were both natty. That's how long we've known.
Oh,
each
for
other.
real? Damn. So you've known about Mitch for a minute.
Yeah.
But Mitch is one of those guys where we do have to push food. Like he's an eater. He has a crazy appetite. Like food is not a problem for him. Like he can, I mean, dude, at one point in the growth phase, because we recomped him down to like 230 from like 245, and then we got him up to 272 at the end of like a 24-week blast. Androgens were at a pretty good amount. I think we were at like 1.4, 1.5 grams. And we were using Lantus towards the end of it for a good portion just because carbs were at like 700 grams every day, and it seemed kind of crazy to not have something like that just to take some relief off the pancreas when you're pushing food that aggressively. But something we noticed right away is he was like, hey, like, we're going to start this little mini cut as we recomped for a few weeks after. He was like, do you think we leave the Lantus in? And I'm like, well, yeah. I'm like, we only pulled your carbs from 750 to like, I think 700 was the first initial pull. And dude, that first week he went hypo like 2 to 3
Yeah.
times.
Yep.
And as soon as that happened, I was like, dude, pull it. So that's something I think people should keep note of. Like we talk about, the Baileys, the Mitches, the Kyles, the clients that can push food really, really aggressively in the off season. I think it's a great thing to pull the insulin out of there just because they respond with carbohydrates way different than most. Like for myself, I'm not like those guys. I can't push 500-600 grams of rice per meal. I'd end up like puking 2-3 meals into the day. That's why I'll
Yeah.
never be big. But I can't handle food like that. So I just thought of that now. Like that's something I think people should keep note of. If you have a client that has those types of food requirements in the off seasons, when you make those initial pulls, they're super like hyper responding to those initial pulls. Like I think like when you said you had to give Kyle refeeds all the time throughout prep because every time you pulled food down, he was just fading away, and Mitch was the same way.
I think we maybe like the longest stretch of time he went without a refeed was like 2 weeks at a time at 2 different points in prep. And
Yeah.
his like I think his lowest of his low days did get down to like 2,400 calories, but that's when we were like really digging, and I was still ending up having to refeed him with like a pretty sizable refeed, a few days later. So that's a really good point, because usually people who are going to be very responsive to carbohydrate are naturally more insulin sensitive to begin with too. I definitely could see that being the case with Mitch, because I know, because me and Mitch are both taller guys, and in the past when I would get and obviously I took some time off, and we won't get into like why, all that stuff, but I'm back now, getting back to it. But like when I would get up to like 250 260, I'd be easily pushing like 6,000 gram or 6,000 calories, and it's easy for me. Like I could eat more, right? So some people are like that. They just have the ability to push that much food, and some people can't. And I think it's honestly sometimes the people who struggle once, like especially male clients more so I'm talking about here, like they get to like that 4,000 to 5,000 calorie range, and then they start to struggle a bit more with the food. That's somebody that insulin can actually be a good driver too, because it does for some people really increase appetite as well too.
Yeah.
So
I'm an interesting case here in my own actual bodybuilding this past off season, because I worked with Justin Compton for about 16 weeks, and we went from 194 to 268 in about from December until I think that was about start of April. So it was like pretty rapid gain. I gained about 70 pounds in that time, but we pushed food up till 9,000 calories a day. It was 9,000 calories a day. But like what I don't actually tell a lot of people this part, so you guys are kind of getting exclusive here. But I tell people that's with a cheat meal on top of the 9,000 calories a day, every day, every single day. And so it was literally I calculated the macros. It was like 480 protein, like 1,700 grams of carbs, and like almost 200 grams of fat before the cheat meal. And I didn't actually, this was one of the first off seasons I didn't use any insulin. And I was actually curious. I asked him why. And he was like, well, your fasting glucose is still around like, 80. You're not like, and I've had the propensity to get fat in previous off seasons. I didn't necessarily get, super like out of shape or anything this past off season. So I'm actually curious about maybe if you have like a thought on why that may be. Is it just different circumstance, obviously different variables, 100%, but do you think insulin in of itself, and I actually got asked this question on my Q&A, could cause fat accrual?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it would probably be like very, very dependent on the person, I suppose. I think for myself, I would say I've kind of observed something similar. Like for me, I've noticed when I've used insulin a bit more aggressively in the past, I felt like I did accumulate body fat a little bit quicker. I felt like the progress was good, but I did feel like I accumulated body fat a little bit quicker. The off season I did before I inevitably had to take some time off. I actually did not use insulin, and I got up to like 260 again in much better condition that time. I was actually running more growth hormone and I wasn't running insulin. So I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I definitely have a lot of clients too who we utilize quite a bit of insulin with, and I haven't seen. I've actually seen them stay leaner in the off season we
Yeah.
used insulin versus the off season that we didn't. So, some people are more predisposed to like things like type 2 diabetes as well too, just genetically. So it could just be down to genetic component of, how you actually um, respond to insulin. But yeah, that's really interesting because I would say I've actually kind of observed something similar in myself, but I'm hard pressed to say necessarily that it causes the fat gain in everybody, but just maybe for some people, it's not the best thing to utilize.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's
Go ahead, Lance.
Now, I was just gonna say that's crazy. You ate that much food
Yeah,
and you
that's
guys
insane.
weren't leveraging any insulin whatsoever, dude.
Yeah.
Because I was obviously I'm an avid, homie, so I'm watching your progress week by week. And I remember you posted at one point you were like, just hit like 243, and I was like, this motherfucker was like 200
Yeah.
a few weeks ago. And I'll be honest, just in my head, I thought, okay, well, this dude's got to be pushing like some Lantus. He's got to be pushing heavy amounts of growth because I'm like, how do you gain that much weight and that much size that fast? So to know that you didn't use any insulin in that's truly wild.
I
Yeah.
think you'd have to almost do something similar and use insulin to know for sure.
Yeah,
Because there
Yeah.
could be
yeah.
other contributing factors too. Like, were you a much better bodybuilder this time in this off season? Your habits and like, everything, your recovery, your diet adherence, like, were you a way better bodybuilder too?
Yo, I would say that probably not on paper. I was a little bit more lenient and more relaxed than I was previously because for the better part of maybe like the 6 years yeah, 6 years I was bodybuilding. I did not miss like a single meal. I didn't even, I was the guy who, if the scale said 301 grams of rice and my plan said 300, I'm taking that gram of
Yeah.
rice out and putting it to the side just so this gets. So I'm like OCD as fuck usually, but this was the first time since because like you, I actually took a break similar myself last year, and it was more so from a mental standpoint. I had a prep that didn't go too well, so I just kind of needed time away from bodybuilding. I honestly haven't lived an adult life without bodybuilding being a big part of it during that period of time. So I was like, okay, I just kind of want to live life normally for like 6 to 7 months. So I came back to bodybuilding, but I think the main factor, I actually did mention this, and now it kind of comes to mind, is that a lot of it was muscle memory. To be honest with you, because I was 250 when I worked with Mike Nassif previously. So yeah, coming back from 194, not taking drugs for like 6 to 12 months, being in a deficit towards the better part of last year to kind of set myself up for the growth phase was probably the biggest factor of why I stayed so lean. But I'm still curious as to why. You would imagine eating that much food, way more than I've ever eaten previously, would at least cause my blood sugar to be a little bit out of whack. But I was wearing a CGM and also tracking alongside with finger prick measurements as well to just kind of see if they were in line, and for the most part they were accurate. But yeah, I would never see my blood glucose be above like 90 2 hours after a meal with like 250 grams of carbs and like 40 grams of fat or something like that,
Yeah,
which
it's
was pretty
interesting you
wild.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. It's interesting you say that too, though, because I'm the same way. Like my blood glucose and my A1C really does not move or become an issue for me. It doesn't really matter how much food I'm eating. My blood glucose, or if I'm using insulin or not, my blood glucose will still be around 80 in the morning fasted. It'll still come down perfectly after meals. Um, but I would say, yeah, almost, if I had to guess, almost like that super compensation was probably a big part of that. You were able to rapidly, like, just able to rapidly, push a lot of that substrate towards actual muscle growth because you were gaining back some ground that you had before.
Yeah.
That could probably be a big part of it. I would say I'll be interested to see for myself too, because I mean I've been off cycle for
You've been
uh,
on for a while.
yeah, like going on 7 months, and then
Oh,
so I just started like 2 weeks
oh
ago
hell
now.
yeah.
So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with the food. Right now, I'm still kind of sitting in a little bit of a deficit just because I want to be just a touch tighter, I think. But I'm also this is exclusive, so I am still coaching myself. But our man Jay Perch is going to be kind of like my second eye. We're going to be meeting like once
Nice.
a month, and
Nice.
he's going to be giving me feedback and helping me make decisions about what I want to do. Um, so I'll be interested to see what we end up doing with food if food ends up going really high quickly and I'm able to stay very lean in the push too as well and have a similar response to what you had. Just due to the reason I had to take some time from bodybuilding, I'm not going to be pushing growth hormone. I'm just sitting at like a replacement dosage, and I'm probably not going to push it for this growth phase just because it's another vector that could impact um, what happened previously. Again, I'll say it again. I always say it, guys. I'm in a good spot now. I took care of what I need to take care of, and I've always been very modest with things. Some of us we just get unlucky sometimes, but that's why you check shit, and that's why you stay smart because you won't catch these things if you don't. But anyway, I'll be
100%.
interested to see how my body responds and if I'm able to like push the food quickly and stay on the leaner side and just regain a bunch of muscle that has been lost. I mean, I've still been training. I've maintained a good amount of it, but you know how it is. Like you
Yeah.
can't after 7 months on TRT, you can't maintain all of that. That's just
No,
not possible.
No, yeah.
no.
Yeah, I'm curious. I definitely want to keep me updated, at least if you're not going to keep the public updated on your progress, because I'm kind of curious as well as to see how things move too.
There'll at least be some close friend stories, so
Yeah,
you guys will see what I'm looking.
yeah,
That's what it's made for, the updates.
exactly.
Yeah. All right.
Listen,
Well, so I did have some other topics I got hit up with. I don't know if you guys have anything pressing that you got asked that you want to talk about. I have a decent one to start off the rip though, if you want me to.
Let it
yeah,
rip,
go
bro.
ahead.
So kind of in a similar vein, safest cycles for young females to run.
I like this question. I like this question a lot because a vast majority of my clientele, especially enhanced clientele, is actually female currently. So I have a good amount of experience with bringing women from the natural side of things because that's where a lot of them came to me from, wanting to go enhance. And usually the first thing that I'm looking at is obviously blood work, making sure that the person's not in a state of estrogen dominance, that we're not going through anything that may have came from hormonal birth control use in the past or current use even. So those are things that I'm trying to at least kind of mitigate off the bat and get them into a proper state to actually facilitate progress, as good progress as possible without going the androgen route. We kind of talked about it earlier. We're also going to kind of exhaust all the non-androgenic tools that we possibly can before going down the actual, steroid route. So things like growth hormone, insulin, peptides, L-carnitine may have some benefit, but usually if a woman's injecting, it's not going to be L-carnitine because those shots kind of do suck. But besides that, other things I can think of is, using basic tools like creatine. I cannot tell you how many women still think creatine's going to make them bloated, make them watery, and all these different kind of myths. And it's like, no, let's, if we're going down the testosterone route, let's use some creatine here first. It only kind of makes a little bit of sense, right? But once we start going down the androgen route, especially if somebody is looking to compete for a long period of time, because I'm not gonna take anybody down that route who's just what you call it, like a bucket list bodybuilder, basically a person who's like, yeah, I'm just going down the stage, I'm doing this one time, and I just want to see how it is. Okay, well, you're gonna be natural for your first show. That's just how I personally do it. I'm not gonna put you and risk your entire future over something that you're just trying. If you're going to compete, I want you to be 100% sure if you're going down the enhanced route, you understand that this is going to be like a 10-year journey. It's not going to be, or at least a 5-year journey, maybe not an entire decade, but the better part of 5 years. And you have big goals and aspirations within the sport. I want to make sure that, okay, well, if we're going down this route, let's go the testosterone replacement therapy route a lot of times first. Reason being is because we can eke out a lot of progress on that. We can go into deficits and maintain a stable androgen level without necessarily having to worry about risking as much muscle loss as we would if we were to go into that in a natural state. If we go down the Anavar route first, the problem I have with that in a lot of situations is we turn women into Wonder Woman for like 4 weeks, right? But then as soon as they come off, they start feeling like shit again. And now, okay, well, when's the next cycle? When's the next cycle? When's the next cycle? They become psychologically dependent on the feeling of being Wonder Woman just as much as us guys become psychologically dependent on being on higher dose androgens. However, it's a lot more of an acutely bad situation for women to kind of develop that mindset and be on androgens year round, because the biggest things that are going to influence your side effects, if we want to call them that, are going to be dose and duration. So if you are going to be on androgens, you also have to understand that this is going to be a 4-week cycle versus testosterone, which we could put in place year round for the rest of your career at a dose that's optimized for you, where you're not incurring any side effects whatsoever. And then we go from there. And the next thing that usually comes in past the TRT thing is usually I like Anavar, especially in this kind of climate that we have right now with Primo. I know it's kind of like cliche to say, oh, Anavar should be like your first cycle. Well, after we put testosterone in place, I think Anavar has a lot of good utilization simply because of the fact of how fast it gets in the system and how fast it gets out of the system. So if we put in 2 milligrams of Anavar, which I may start some women off with like 2 milligrams of Anavar if they're very, very worried about realization. Some women can't even handle 1 milligram of Anavar. So I'm going to start very, very low if that's their main concern over all of this, because we understand, again, this is going to be a 10-year journey. It's going to escalate from here if you can handle it and if there's a need for it. But we're going to start low just to see how you're doing on this specific dose. Okay, you're handling 2 milligrams. Let's go 5 milligrams, maybe 5 times per week. It doesn't even necessarily need to be every single day. I'm okay with using that, 5 times per week, because we have the testosterone base in the background that's facilitating the consistent long-term progress. And then maybe we're using Anavar as like an acute tool to drive up training performance during the actual session itself. So in my opinion, in 2026, that's probably the safest route. But if Primo was available, I wouldn't be opposed to using Primo in for maybe a first exposure as well. It just kind of depends on the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say my opinion is pretty much exactly in line with that. If a female comes to me and she wants to dabble into, physique enhancement, which is a broad umbrella, it's not just androgens, right? Obviously, we're gonna go down every possible route of the likely suspects that aren't androgens first and get some progress out of those. But even before we do any of that, if somebody's coming to me and they're a fresh client, we're going to figure out what are all the other things outside of the PEDs that you're doing wrong. Is your training actually addressing what you're trying to grow? Is your recovery actually in a place where you are getting the right amount of sleep, you're staying on a good schedule, you're following your meal plan appropriately? Like, if any of like these basic things are out of whack, you're not ready to use physique enhancing drugs, in my opinion. So say all that stuff is checked off. Usually, I would say probably some of the first things I'm looking at utilizing with a female, obviously, are going to be non-androgens, but to be more specific, in a growing phase, probably things like growth hormone and insulin. In a dieting phase, things like clenbuterol, thyroid when it's needed, obviously, and then also growth hormone in the dieting phase as well. All those things, we can eke a lot of progress out of all of that stuff before we even touch an androgen. And then the second layer of that too is if either before any of that, if they're open to it, I would obviously have the conversation about HRT and actually replacing any hormones that need to be replaced. If they're not quite ready to go that route yet, but they still want to dabble in some of those other things, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. But then definitely if we're transitioning out of those non-androgens and starting to talk about androgens, I'm not going to put a girl on Primo or Anavar if she's not even on TRT. Like if you're not on TRT and you could be on TRT or progesterone replacement or estrogen replacement, whatever you do need for your blood work profile, if we're not going to have that conversation, but you want to talk to me about Anavar, we're kind of going about this ass backwards, because exactly like Tom said, that Anavar, yeah, it's going to be great for 4 or 6 weeks, whatever the burst of it we run is going to be. But after that 4 to 6 weeks is up, again, like Tom said, you're returning to the environment that you were in before. Whereas at least if we have that baseline hormone environment optimized, you're operating from a higher baseline that you were initially anyway. So I would definitely, the thing I also want to say to this, if the person who asked the question does listen, is the thing you have to understand about like PED use, especially androgen use with female, there is no safe, right? Everything is going to come with some amount of a risk. Everything is going to come with some amount of a trade-off. There are things that are non-androgenizing, which is probably the biggest thing that females are worried about, but they still do carry some potential risk, like utilizing something like growth hormone. I don't want to scare anybody because it's very rare that this would occur, but if you did have cancer in your body, that growth hormone will contribute to that cancer metastasizing, right? So there is still risk no matter what route we go down from a PED use perspective. So I think the question people should be asking themselves is not what's the safe thing I can do, what am I willing to do within my tolerated risk profile?
I love that. I really love that. The one thing I want to mention before you hop in, Lance, is what you just said right there is there's no say. I get a lot of women who, like I mentioned before, were in that position. And like the number one question they always ask is like, how can I do this without turning into a man? Right. And that's what every woman wants to know. The thing is, it's like, we could do this in like the safest way possible on paper, but like I cannot guarantee you that you're not going to have any virilization. There are women who cannot take 1 milligram of any androgen on the planet without incurring some sort of virilization side effects. And unfortunately, androgens are just not the drugs that they're going to use, or they just are going to have to accept the virilization that comes along with those drugs at the end of the day. So I think that's a big misconception as well, is that there is like a right way to do something for everybody to get the results they want without any side effects whatsoever. And unfortunately, it's not a game where you can have your cake and eat it too all the time for every single individual out there.
No. I mean, we see this with males too. Like, I'll just take myself for example. I have got and I'll just say right now, I've done calcium glucarate. I do DIM. I have my digestion is great. I don't bloat. I don't have any digestive issues. I am an extremely high aromatizer. For me, I can control it with an aromatase inhibitor or secondary compound, whatever it is. I probably don't run as much tests as some people do, although, I do still like, with EQ and stuff, I am going to try to push it higher in this growth phase than I have in the past. But that being said, like, for me, my high estrogen is something I can kind of offset and be relatively fine with, as long as I don't crush my estrogen from a blood work profile. For females, they could be just as sensitive to androgens in the same way that I'm sensitive to aromatizing, right? So like Tom said, you could be the unlucky female that if you take anything at all, your voice is going to drop an octave, or you're going to get maybe some facial hair growth or whatever it is. We can't know until Pandora's box is open, and once it's open, and you kind of have to deal with the consequences. So you really want to make sure that you're ready for that before you actually go into the androgens. And if you're going to any coach and you haven't done any of these other things that Tom has talked about or I have talked about thus far, and we need to get to what Lance is going to say, but they haven't talked about any of these other things and they just want to start you on an androgen right away, I'll just say it, not trying to step on anybody's toes, run the other fucking way. Because
Yeah,
that should not
100%.
if the first thing they talk about, you're talking to them about hand since you haven't done any of this other stuff yet, and the first thing they want to talk to you about is Anavar, fucking run. So
100%.
No, I mean, you guys hit the head on like damn near every single thing. The only thing I was gonna say that I would just double down on is to any females that are gonna watch this and when we clip this stuff is, you know, like ask yourself, you know, what the next 5 years of your life, what you want it to look like. Like seriously, like be transparent with yourself. Do you want to have kids? Is that something that is like a non-negotiable for you? And you know, like if it is, then you know, maybe that like a long career in bodybuilding is just not the route you're going to go. And I know a lot of girls are going to be like, oh, I see, you know, some of these girls on the wellness stage, you know, with like 2 to 3 kids, just like I tell guys, right? You're not Ronnie Coleman. You're not them. Like, you're not the genetic freak that you might think you are. Like, you might not be as lucky as them. Like you both hit on the point. You might take 1 milligram and lose the ability to have kids, which might be like your number one priority when you're 31 or 32 years old. Like, don't be negligent in your early 20s and in your mid 20s. You know, like, have that conversation with your partner early on. You know, like, this isn't a safe sport. That's just the reality of it. And I think a lot of people get it twisted, just even in the verbiage of asking that question of, how do I do this in the safest manner? Well, obviously, you know, we hit on every single option that you can utilize. But the reality is, the moment you bring in exogenous androgen and it's no longer safe as a female, it's just not.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's like, driving with a seatbelt. You're still in the risk of getting in a car accident. Does not mean that the seatbelt's going to save you from a ton of damage. Is it going to save you from maybe more damage if you didn't wear the seatbelt? Probably, but like you could still get very much fucked up driving on the road in a car accident wearing a seatbelt.
yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and I think
100%.
what Lance said there, he kind of said it quickly, but an important thing to think about too is like when we're talking about female physique enhancement is a lot of the things that we said prior to even talking about any of the androgens, a lot of those things aren't or like will not interfere with fertility, right? So that's if that's a big thing for you that you want to have children someday as a female and you're considering being an enhanced competitor, honestly, I would say if that's like a big deal breaker for you, then probably going past HRT and like growth hormone, things like that, probably not something you should do. If
I
it's
would
like,
argue that competing should probably be
that's super
something
Yeah.
true
you
too.
shouldn't do either, because
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
being you're probably already going to say this, but being at like a low body fat percentage in of itself is pretty fucking horrible for fertility. Even if you're only in that position for a few weeks, you could do some long-term damage for your ability to actually get pregnant long-term. So even naturals, it is a risk for them as well, regardless if they're using HRT or not.
Yeah.
That's a good
Yep.
point.
And like Tom said and Lance said, you don't get to decide what your genetics are. You don't get to necessarily decide to be me and have a child peak blast after your wife finished a prep. So like
It's God
I
genetics right
that's
there.
like that's literally like my wife when we started trying, I was like, hun, like this could take a while. I just want you to know that this could take a while. She had just done a prep recently and she got pregnant on her first ovulatory menstrual cycle
Jesus.
that she
That's
had
crazy.
post prep.
No.
And I was full blast. I told her, I was like, hun, just buckle up. Like this might be a process.
Yeah.
But
After it
anyway,
happened, you're like,
Yeah.
this is peak performance right here.
yeah.
Colin's like, yeah, strong swimmers, we're good.
yeah. I don't know, man. I'm telling you, like, I like if you like the anatomy would have told you otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
But hey, like I mean, at the end of the day, I think that it's important to just think about these things, especially as a competitor,
Yeah.
even if you're a male who's considering going further in the physique sport, but like your wife is kind of, talking to you like, hey, I want to kind of have kids soon here, it's like bodybuilding and fertility aren't necessarily something that goes hand in hand for males or females either.
No.
And so it's just something to consider too, especially if you're a young female, like the person asking the question. You have your whole life ahead of you. I have one competitor who's going to be competing this year, and my conversation with her was she loves bodybuilding, and she's had like kind of these different things pulling at her where she's going, I don't know if like, because she's very religious, she's like, I don't know if my relationship with bodybuilding is really honoring God. I don't know like what I want long term from a family perspective, but she loves bodybuilding and she trains like an animal and all this stuff. And honestly, we did decide to prep ultimately because I was like, hey, you know what? You're young right now. You're going to do this prep hormonally, naturally. Um, you know, um, I'm confident that, you being this age, like doing this prep now, whatever comes out of it, you're probably within a reasonable time frame going to be able to recover like an ovulatory menstrual cycle, especially if it's one prep. But she needs to figure out if she wants to fucking do this. And that's the biggest thing is like, she's not somebody that I'm like, is on the fence. I'm like, just don't do it, right? Because she loves it. She lives the lifestyle. She breathes for it. She just doesn't know if like the actual competing is for her. So she's actually the opposite case. I was like, I think you just need to compete once, and if you absolutely hate it and it only brings like more negative to your life, then and you can like be like, okay, bodybuilding boxes checked off. I'm not doing that again. That's how it was for my wife. She was just like, I love bodybuilding. I love training, but I just need to know if competing is for me. And I'm like, okay, well, let's find out.
Give it a go.
But if you're going to do that, you do still need to understand that there are going to be risks, even if you do it naturally, that come with it. But anyway,
100%, bro.
100%.
Yeah. Any questions you get this week, Lance? That were good?
To be honest, I have a lot of DMs I still have to get back to with
Yeah.
people. Just
Let's
as a
pick
whole,
one good
so-
one, hit on it, and then honestly, we had a really good conversation surrounding and some really good conversations honestly, we should just call this the female episode.
Yeah, the female.
Like, this has been
for
an
sure.
awesome episode for any female competitors, anybody who's considering competing, anybody who is competing, to come give a watch and just understand, some different things within female competition and physique enhancement. But I want to be conscious of time because I believe we're going to jump over and record for Tom's show right
Yes,
after.
sir. One thing I did want to mention for the guys out there worried about fertility, freeze your sperm. It's not
Yeah.
as expensive as
I was
doing a
just
whole
gonna say that
fertility
before.
protocol. Yeah, so that's something I recommend to any young guy who comes to me and they're
Running
worried about it.
HCG alongside your cycles is not going to be
No,
enough, guys.
it's not going to save you. It's not going to do it. Only works if you care about your nut size. That's really about
That's
it.
really it. If you want a nice pair of balls, that's all it's really going to do for you.
That's legit it. All right.
Bailey shot me a message and said that we need to check our comments. I don't know if we were getting spammed with questions or not.
Oh,
shoot.
Bailey said, you started me December 1st, told me to get my shit together, homie.
Oh yeah.
She's calling.
Oh
bullshit
yeah.
on you. And then
Maybe I did crack the whip
said his
early.
low days corrected me. They weren't 2,400. His lowest days were 2,550.
Okay.
That's
When-
lowest of the low. That was bottom of the barrel for him. Still eating
that's
250
not
grams of
low at
carbs.
all.
Yeah.
That's
not low
most
at all.
bikini competitors off seasons right there.
Yeah.
Shit, my bad, Bailey, for cracking the whip early. But you look great right now. And we're gonna go win a show
Yeah.
next week, so it is what it is.
You know what?
Hey, we're-
Your Christmas present can be given to you
Yeah.
in May.
Yeah,
right.
when we go to nationals and get a nice dub, then we can have fun.
All right, you got one more for us to send it off with, Lance?
No, I had one, but I know we can use it for the next one because it's gonna turn into a tangent. Because I know I'm gonna get heated with
All right.
it.
Let me see if I have
I'm
something
curious,
quick.
but
It's nothing too bad. It's just shit on social media that's become a trend recently that I'm like, everyone needs to shut the fuck up.
oh no. Is it what I think it is? I think it may be, honestly. Some bullshit, dude.
It's
I
probably
can't
is.
stand social media trends, to be honest with you, recently. And it's funny. My bodywork guy, he came to my place earlier, and we were talking. We're like, social media attention spans are crazy. I feel like if 9/11, not to get controversial, happened like a couple months ago, people would
You
not
wouldn't
be
even
talking
blink.
about it
No.
anymore the
No.
way that and they talked about it like it happened yesterday, like 5 years after it happened in 2001. But just the speed of the news nowadays is just so fast. I
Oh
got
yeah, somebody asked us to
Designed like
rate their
that.
cycle.
rate their cycle.
Oh,
Okay.
I'll
oh,
do that
that's
quick
curious.
and then
Let's
we'll
do it.
bounce. All
love a
right.
good drug cycle.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Let's see.
I took a screenshot of it here somewhere.
So 2 grams a test.
Yeah. 5 grams of test, 3 grams
It's
of
like, yo,
anadrol.
Alex, are you hearing these options by chance?
Damn, did I not screenshot it? I'm gonna be so bummed.
Oh
I'm
no.
so bad about myself.
I swore I did.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
This is the one thing about doing a podcast live is
Yeah.
that you have these
It's
moments, but
straight line.
you know what? It's what makes us different.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah,
afraid
I like
to show
it.
our flaws.
We're authentic.
Yeah, this is the first live stream I've ever been on, so there we go. It's definitely new,
Fuck yeah.
not something I'm used to for sure.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah,
Just taking
yeah.
everyone's virginity card.
Yeah, legit.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the platform people do the streams on nowadays?
Like the software or the actual platforms?
The actual platform that people are like, yeah, like Clavicular and like those kind of.
Oh, I think they mostly
God.
multi-stream. I think a lot of them don't like sign a specific contract and they stream to YouTube and Twitch at the same time
Oh, that's pretty sick.
to like kind of like broaden the whole like amount of people they could bring in. That's something I considered doing, but honestly, like Twitch isn't really like a fitness community in the way YouTube is, so I just don't really think that there's much of a point. Anyway, I couldn't find the guy's cycle, but it had Trent in it. So
Okay, well,
So probably great. It's
10,
probably
yeah.
top tier. Yeah. S tier.
Probably
S
top
A
tier.
plus.
hey man, you know, I've kind of come full. I will say I've kind of come full circle on the 19 Nors. I've definitely used them a little bit more with clients now, even in off-season setting than I used to. I will say.
That may be a good, topic to kind of end it off with is, do you think maybe Trent is underrated or overrated in terms of the negatives that come along with it?
Ooh.
Underrated as fuck. Underrated
think-
as fuck. I'll start it off with that. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I'm sorry, I want to jump in on this one because I definitely have an
Go
opinion on this.
go. No.
I think it's underrated as fuck. The reality is, it's a phenomenal drug, right? Like, and now the one thing I will say as a caveat, just like me and Colton talk about all the time, the moment anything you utilize impacts sleep quality and recovery, I think it's time to pull it. But I have had utilization with it with a current athlete on prep at an incredibly low dose of someone that typically is super anxious, and I have utilized 19 Nors with people that typically are super anxious, and I have seen the reverse effect where they're actually like in a way better spot mentally off a super low dosage. And I don't know if that's for everyone, but that is with like the 3 athletes that I have utilized very low dose trend with, and they have had phenomenal results. And I'm talking about like a 50 to 70 milligram per week usage in that regard.
Well, if you think about it, why are we typically utilizing trend and contest prep aside maybe from like a performance perspective is to be competitive with the glucocorticoid receptor, right? So there could be some potential. That's why some people actually get more of like a euphoric feeling from trend than like an anger.
And dopamine.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's just super person dependent. I have an athlete on my roster who came on my roster recently, and he literally the cycle he ran off-season cycle before coming to me. Now we're doing a little bit of like a short little push phase here into a prep. He ran literally just test and trend, and he had some of the best growth he's ever had. And I pulled his lab work literally a week after he came off cycle, after he took his last shots, and his blood work is phenomenal. So for him, like, is trend the worst thing in the planet? Not really. It seems like it works pretty well for him. His kidney markers were great. Like everything was fine. And so I just think that, like, again, this is something that I've heard you and Joseph talk about a lot, Tom, is like, I think a lot of people think themselves into side effects, you know,
Yeah.
and they
Yes,
expect to
yes,
feel a
yes.
certain way on a compound, and so they do, right? Um, but I've definitely had the opposite too. Like, I've had clients who, you know, we get up to just like even just 70 mgs of tren in prep, and they're like, "Hey, man, I can feel like the nails on the chalkboard in the back of my brain a little bit already. Let's just hold it
Yeah.
steady here." They definitely exist. I think it just again comes down to like who the individual is, but like I don't think there's like people now have this idea like you never have to use any more than 50 or 70 milligrams of tren. Okay, for some people, sure, but for somebody who responds really well to tren, maybe using more tren can actually be a potential leverage point for them. You know, it
Yeah.
is a pretty potent compound for training performance, I'd say.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think, Trend is definitely a great tool, and you could use it in like different. I'm not against using it in like the off season scenario either at like a very, very low dose with specific cases, especially if somebody stays on a little bit more of like, if we want to talk about somatotypes and like body types, somebody a little bit more like stereotypically endomorphic who is a little bit more on the propensity to gain a little bit more body fat. We're already done all the things of like controlling their diet, making sure that they're implementing their cardio, they're not missing any of the variables whatsoever, and they're still on cycle, getting a little bit fat, and they may not necessarily handle MPP too well. I'm okay using trembolone at a very low dose in substitution for the situations where we may be throwing MPP in the mix, maybe like at the end of an off season to push a little bit, facilitate a little bit more training aggression, maybe even facilitate a better body composition as well. It also has impacts on TBG and like the thyroid, so it's essentially gonna increase your available free thyroid hormone, which is pretty beneficial in both the prep and also in an off-season scenario when food is getting a little bit on the higher side and you don't want to facilitate the need for like super physiological doses of T3. Obviously, it can make your T3 that you're already using work better. It can facilitate IGF-1 a little bit better as well. So the growth hormone, insulin, all the other things that you're taking work better alongside trembolone. So I'm a big fan of using it at a very low dose. Now, I think the reason why it gets a bad rap is because previously what was considered a low dose was 50 milligrams a day or 350 milligrams a week was the starting point of people's preps, and it only got higher from there. And like that's like the kind of the moniker of like the 2000s 2010 kind of era of using trembolone. But recently, as we've come into better understanding of how to utilize your drug correctly, and a lot more people are utilizing it between like the 50 to 150 milligram dosing, we see that it's not necessarily as bad on a lot of markers as a lot of people once thought. Especially, I have all my athletes who are enhanced get their cystatin C checked at least once a year, and I've never once seen either EQ or tren
Nope.
cause aberrations in like cystatin C. So to say that those drugs are inherently more nephrotoxic, maybe, but I haven't seen it when it's applied correctly.
No, and that's exactly like we were kind of having this conversation more about like the macro side of things on your Instagram the other day, but I'll say the same thing. Like, Kyle, I know he doesn't care me sharing, but Kyle ran EQ his whole prep, and his EGFR based on cystatin C was like 120 after prep was done, and he had trend in place and EQ at the same time in prep. And then this other client who came to me recently who ran that cycle of test and trend, his EGFR was in the, I think it was like between like 105. I want to say it was like 105, 104 or something like that based on cystatin C after running a trend off-season cycle. It's just like, I haven't seen it in the lab work. I haven't seen this kidney toxicity people talk about with EQ. And again, like those studies were in rat surrogate models too. So how much does that apply to humans? We don't really know. But definitely with tren, like when I say a high dose of tren, I'm talking like, a high dose of tren to me. Like if somebody's like, I'm writing 300 milligrams of tren, I'd be like, okay, that's a high dose
Yeah.
of tren. Like, I'd say I'd say like most guys when I'm using it with them, they're gonna fall somewhere between 70 and 150. You know, depending on how well they respond to it.
Yeah, I'm on the same line, same idea, 100%.
All right. Well, I think that's an episode, guys. So thank you so much, Tom, for coming and joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Were our first guest.
Thank you
An
for having
awesome
me.
first guest to have. I think this episode's gonna go down extremely, extremely well. But for everybody tonight, that has been Coaches Off the Clock, and we'll catch you next week.
Fuck yeah.
Peace out.